Hey, this is Cortland Sutton,
Hey, this is Tim Patrick.
and you're listening to The Snap
with Sidney Jones
on Broncos.
Podcast Network. Yeah.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome back to the Broncos Podcast Network and YouTube for this week's episode of The Snap. I'm your host, Sidney Jones, and it's the final week of the regular season here, and the Denver Broncos are back at Empower Field at Mile High this Sunday to take on the Los Angeles Chargers. So joining me for this week's episode is ESPN's NFL Nation Los Angeles Chargers reporter, Lindsay Thiry. Lindsay, thanks so much for joining me today. Pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure being here.
Of course. How are you? How are things over there in Los Angeles?
All is good. It's week 18, and what's become a very long season, and just kind of finding that extra gear as the Chargers get ready to go into the playoffs.
Yeah, season's not over for you quite yet. How's the season really just been over there? Been exciting, probably.
Yeah, it's been exciting. It's been very up and down. This team, it's just been a roller coaster. They went into the season as a Super Bowl favorite, which kind of seemed crazy enough for an organization that has only been in the playoffs twice in the last, since 2013, last 10 years. And then all of a sudden they had a rash of injuries, and they went from Super Bowl favorite to how are they going to keep this thing together at all? And then here they go with 2 games remaining, clinch a playoff spot. So it's been a roller coaster. It's been a really hard team to define, but nevertheless, they're getting good at the right time, which is exciting for them.
Yeah, you mentioned it, getting good at the right time. I feel like they're really peaking right now, Lindsay. What have you kind of seen, I guess, maybe change about this team just in recent weeks?
It was really funny early on in the season in the locker room. You just didn't feel it. And when people say it, like it's a hard thing to define, but it didn't seem like a together team. It didn't seem like guys knew each other, that there was any kind of like chemistry. And then lo and behold, Khalil Mack starts having defensive dinners. Kyle Van Noy over the last several weeks has been hosting like player only defensive meeting. So it's really something about how they've gelled, how they've kind of come together, starting kind of midway through the season and on. A lot of times that can be overlooked or maybe spoken too much about. But for this team, because of all the individual talent they have, that really seems to be kind of the final component that they needed to get to know each other, to realize they need to play hard for each other and go out there with just a better energy.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Lindsay, before we get, too far into this matchup, I know it's just been a really tough week for the entire NFL community, given what's happened, with Bill's safety, Damar Hamlin. I know we're all so thankful he's doing better. He's now responsive. Those were some of the latest reports today. Several Broncos players, they've talked this week just about, how it's kind of maybe changed their perspective of this game and how they're just dealing with this they have a game to play in a couple of days. So how have kind of some of the Chargers players talked about this week and are handling this really scary situation?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern. There's obviously everyone has expressed prayers, their thoughts, everything for Damar, his health, his recovery. So they have like very heavy hearts. Brandon Staley spoke about how when he was a coach back east at James Madison as an assistant, at John Carroll as an assistant, that he actually knew Central Catholic High School well, recruited that school, recruited Damar. The Chargers defensive coordinator, Ronaldo Hill, was Damar's DB coach at Pitt. So there's a lot of kind of close connections there. So obviously very heavy hearts. On the other side of that, the Chargers did take an approach where they had the team doctor come talk to the players and tell them like what happened and why it happened. So on some level, as scary as the situation is, it also eased some of their concerns, at least from what their team doctor said, kind of how rare this is to have happen. Kind of called it like a little bit like being struck by lightning. I don't know that makes it less scary, but for them, it kind of put into perspective what happened and eased some concerns about whether it could happen to them.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I'm glad a doctor came and talked to them. I know here with the Broncos, they've had a lot of resources and the team addressed them in the same regard. So yeah, praying that Damar continues to recover and is in the right direction. So thank you for sharing that, Lindsay. Going back to this matchup here, when you look at the season overall, what has kind of impressed you just about Justin Herbert's performance this year? I mean, in the recent weeks, he's looking like one of the best quarterbacks in the league, really.
Yeah, I think what's really been lost on Justin's season is that in week 2, he had fractured rib cartilage. End of the Chiefs game, he gets absolutely crunched, and his performance took a dip. And I think a lot of people were looking around saying, what's wrong with Justin Herbert? And it was really kind of easy. He had fractured rib cartilage. The playbook was really kind of condensed to compensate for that. The offense, not to mention, was without several key playmakers. Keenan Allen had a big hamstring issue. Mike Williams had a high ankle sprain. So Justin Herbert was not only hurt himself, but he was hurting because he didn't have his full arsenal of playmakers. But what has been impressive is how he navigated that, how he's come out the other side, and how he really has this team peaking at the right time. I mean, he has shown, excuse me, some signs of just emotion on offense that we've really never seen from Justin, and excitement over some of the plays the last several weeks. And he's also shown a steadiness. A lot of his teammates just say he's so poised and he's so even keeled, and they're in a lot of 2-minute situations, a lot of must win 2-minute situations. And Justin's demonstrated the poise to handle that.
Well, looking at the Broncos and Chargers last meeting back in week 6, I know the Broncos defense held Austin Eckler to just 36 rushing yards. Justin Herbert didn't throw a touchdown pass. I think it broke a record for him that week. How do you think this Chargers offense is going to fare going up against, this Broncos defense this time around?
Yeah, I think that they are a very different group this time around. I think there's more emphasis that we saw this last week on trying to get the ball going in the run game with Austin Eckler. So I think that we will see them continue to try to do that. It's going to be really interesting because of when the game is being played. The Chargers might have already clinched that number 5 seed if the Ravens game earlier ends and the Ravens lose. So I think that it's going to be really interesting. Brandon Staley has said they're going in with the intention of winning this game, but and that they're planning, they're practicing as though everyone's going to play and they're going full steam ahead. But I do think that dependent on how they get started, what happens in the other game, I think it could really see what they decide to do against the Broncos. If it becomes like a tune-up game, if it becomes a rest game, I think that depends on some stuff. If all things considered, I think they're really going to try to run the football, get Austin a couple touchdowns so he can get 20 on the season again. And then I think they'll also try to kind of just tune up a few of the connections with Mike Williams and Keenan Allen.
Well, we'll see if, all starters play this weekend. But, Lindsay, as I'm sure this Broncos offense has really struggled this season, specifically looking at the offensive line. They've struggled in recent weeks just with, injuries, lack of continuity. I know the Chargers pass rush, they've been a pretty dominant group the past few games. So who do you think's really shined in that regard this season that, Russell and company should be on the lookout for?
People might laugh because he's an old veteran, but Kyle Van Noy has really come alive off the edge. Like I mentioned earlier, he's become one of the, leaders hosting these player only kind of defensive meetings so they can all get on the same page. And it's really benefited him too. He's had 4 sacks over the last 4 straight games. And Morgan Fox has been another kind of role player guy that's had to step up as they've had several injuries across the line. And then Joey Bosa, name some people might know, he returned last week for the first time since week 3. Brandon Staley after the game had a very long-winded answer about Joey's performance. Mm-hmm. To sum it up, it was, we're happy to have Joey out there. Joey was pretty rusty. So I think they will look for Joey to get obviously back out there again this week and kind of try to continue to get into football shape and knock some of the rust off.
Yeah. Well, depending on if you guys play starters or not this weekend, I know you guys are going to be looking to get that win. Like you said, Coach Brandon Staley talked about that this week. So how do you think, Sunday's performance might just affect going into the playoffs for you guys and just give them momentum really heading into the off season or the postseason? Sure.
Yeah. I've covered teams before that have rested starters. That final game of the season, actually the Rams, I think was back in 2017, had clinched early, rested their starters week 17, or it was week 17 back then. Yeah. And before the playoffs, and they went to the playoffs absolutely flat. It was not good. I have not seen where a team rests and goes into the playoffs with a ton of momentum. So, if I were the coach, obviously I'm not, going into that game, I think you want to get your starters out there. I think you want to play really solid football. Now, if they don't finish the game, great. Like if you want to get them a little extra rest there, but for the Chargers to go into the playoffs, to me, they need to go out there. They need to play a few solid quarters depending on, what the outcome of that Ravens game was. And then you can start saying, okay, let's get you out of the game. Let's get you some rest. But to me, it's like go in a little final tune up and keep it moving.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see what happens. It's always a fun matchup when the Broncos and Chargers play each other. You never know what can happen. So, well, Lindsay, so appreciate your insight on this matchup. Before you go, just want to switch gears and dive into your career for a couple minutes. As many of my listeners know here on the Snap, one of my main goals is just to highlight women's impact in and around the NFL. So looking at your career, for many of my listeners who might not know, Lindsay, what does your role with ESPN really entail?
Sure. I've been with ESPN. I think this is my 5th season now. And I spent first 4 covering the Rams, where I'm doing the same job now with the Chargers, writing a lot for ESPN.com. We have a feature that comes out pretty much every week, covering the news. And then also there's a heavy TV component where I get to appear on SportsCenter, get to appear on like NFL Live or Sunday NFL Countdown, with reports on the Chargers, or sometimes on the TV side of things, still the Rams.
What has kind of been maybe your favorite part about this role, and the most challenging part as well?
Yeah, I think my favorite part is just the kind of different stories we get to tell.
Yeah.
We get to cover the biggest stories in the league. Plus, it's like you have the room to find kind of some of the niche stories. Like this last week, I was able to write about a special teams guy who was a substitute teacher just a few years ago, DeAndre
Oh my
Carter,
God.
which is, yeah, it's like a really cool kind of moment to
Yeah.
kind of highlight somebody else. But then when it's like Justin Herbert, you cover all the big storylines of Justin Herbert as well. I'd say probably like the hardest part is just time management, finding the time to write the features in between TV hits, in between breaking news. There can be a lot of balls in the air to juggle. At the end of the day, it's all fun stuff, but it can get a little bit stressful.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely during the season. Hard to find
Yeah.
for yourself too.
Yeah, that doesn't exist.
Yeah, that really doesn't exist. That's true. Can you kind of walk me through the path that you took to get to where you are today?
Yeah, it's like you see those diagrams where they're like what success looks like and then what it really is.
I love it.
Yeah, long story short, I've been doing this to date myself, let's see, 12 years. And I started in Great Falls, Montana, working for the local news department,
Yeah.
and covered 6-man high school football and junior college. I think it was NAI football at Carroll College. And from there went to the Atlanta Falcons, was their team reporter for a year.
Oh, awesome.
And then came back to the West Coast where I'm from, and got a job in LA working for foxsports.com, and just kind of zigzagged my way up, ended up at the LA Times. They taught me how to write there, which was like kind of insane to learn how to write at the LA Times.
Okay.
But I hosted a lot of digital videos for them,
Oh,
and
cool.
then parlayed that into my job at ESPN.
Oh, awesome. What kind of, looking at this career that you've had, Lindsay, I guess are some of the challenges that you faced along the way, and kind of, can you walk me through how you overcame some of them?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is hearing the word no. When you're applying for new jobs and trying to move up, I had a lot of executives, a lot of news directors look at my resume. I mean, I remember one network looked at my resume when I was at the LA Times, and I was simultaneously also working for Fox Sports 1 as a freelancer. And somebody said, your resume's all over the place. Like you do everything, but nothing. And I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Right.
And I was told, like, you really need to figure out, like, do you want to be on TV? Do you want to be a host? Do you want to be a reporter? Do you want to be a writer? And I was like, well, I was on the path of honestly just saying yes to
Everything.
people who asked me if I wanted to work for them. Like the LA Times asks you if you want to apply for a position, you apply for the position.
do it,
If they offer it, you kind of take it. So I think that was really the biggest challenge, and the biggest hurdle was feeling like I should be moving on to the next step, but hearing the word no, or hearing the word like you're not the fit here, and then still having like the determination and just kind of the willpower to keep going, because hearing no is really hard.
Yeah, it definitely is, for sure. Well, last one here for you, Lindsay. I like to end these episodes just really inspiring the younger generation. So what's one piece of advice you'd look to give someone getting into this industry, no matter what area of it really that they want to work in?
It sounds so, it's oversimplified, but just work really hard. It's why I am where I am. I took the first job that was offered to me out of college, and I just kept my head down and worked hard. Not really someone, I probably should have done a better job networking and sending emails and kind of lobbying for myself. But I've always just been a really firm believer that if you work really hard and the product you put out is really good, good things are going to happen. And truthfully, that's how I got to where I am. It was just like putting out a good product, working really hard, showing improvement, and the right people will notice, and opportunities will come.
Definitely. I love that one. Sounds easy enough.
Easy enough, yeah. But you got to be the first one there. You got to be the last one to leave. And when else, for the young people, when everyone else is going to have fun,
right? You're going to be working.
Probably not. Yeah, you're probably going to be working.
You just got to be okay with it.
Got to be okay with it. And there will come a day. Well, no, even on Sundays, even on Christmas, you miss a lot of things for this job. But if you love it, it's okay.
Definitely. Yeah. We had a Christmas game and a New Year's game this year. So
yeah, you know the drill.
You know the drill over here.
Yeah.
Lindsay, I can't thank you enough for joining me on today's episode. It was really a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of The Snap Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in. And thank you again to Lindsay Thiry for joining me. Make sure to follow the Broncos Podcast Network on Twitter and stay up to date on the Broncos YouTube for the latest episodes. I will see you all next time.